Welcome to lesson 109 today. Lesson 109. This lesson discusses equations with exponents. And here I have an example of an equation with an exponent. So equation, we have our equal sign. And look, our x is squared. So we have an exponent of 2 that is listed here. Solving this equation is going to take 3 steps. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get this term that has the x in it isolated. So first step, subtract 1 from both sides. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that. Let's start with our 3x squared plus 1 equals 28. Let's subtract 1. Subtract 1. Okay, so that goes away. I now have 3x squared equals 27. The second step, divide both sides by 3. So I'm going to get that x squared by itself. So divide by 3, divide by 3. That's going to leave me with x squared equals 27 divided by 3 is 9. So that was the second step. The third step says find the square root of both sides, noting there will be 2 solutions. One is going to be positive and one is going to be negative. So if I take the square root of x squared, okay, that would look something like this. So that means what multiplied by itself will give me x squared? Well, the simple answer to that is just an x. So x multiplied by itself would give me x squared. So the square root of the left-hand side will be an x. What's the square root of the right-hand side, or the square root of 9? We know that the square root of 9 could be 3, or it could be negative 3. So, in solving this equation, we found that x could equal 3 or negative 3. Okay, so those would be my 2 answers. Okay, here's another example. Again, equations with exponents. So when we look at this example, again, we need to get the x term isolated. I was subtracting 1 from that x term, so that means I need to add 1 to get rid of it. So add 1 to both sides, and I'm going to get 3x squared, that goes away, equals 47 plus 1 is 48. So to get the x part by itself now, let's divide by 3. So when I do that, my 3's cancel out and I get x squared equals 48 divided by 3. 3 goes into 4 one time. 1 times 3 is 3. Subtract, bring down. 3 goes into 18 6 times. 3 times 6 is 18, and I would have a 0. Okay, so 48 divided by 3 is 16. Now we take the square root of both sides. So I take the square root of x squared, I get x. Take the square root of 16, and I get 4. And don't forget, negative 4. Again, there will be 2 answers to that, 4 and negative 4. And that simply means, and you can check if you don't believe me, that if I take 4 and plug it in up here, I'm going to make this statement true. And if I take negative 4 and plug it in up here, it will also make this statement true. All right, we have 2x squared equals 10. So I'm not adding or subtracting anything to the x term here, so I don't have to worry about that first step that we have been doing. So I need to get this x squared by itself. So let's divide by 2 and divide by 2. The 2's cancel out. I get x squared equals 10 divided by 2 is 5. So I'm going to take the square root of both sides. I get x on the left-hand side. Okay, so now I'm looking at the square root of 5. Do not be tempted to plug that into your calculator and give me a decimal answer. I don't want a decimal answer. I want the exact answer. So when I take the square root of 5, what do I get for an answer? I get a positive square root of 5, and I get a negative square root of 5. Those literally are my answers because it does not come out to a whole number when I try to take the square root of 5. So I still have a positive and a negative answer, and it is the square root of 5. I do want to note, do not fall into the temptation to say the square root of 5 and the square root of negative 5. That is not correct. I didn't ask you to take the square root of negative 5, so in no way would we be able to come up with that answer. So it is the square root of 5, and then the opposite of that, which is the negative square root of 5. Again, not the same as this down here. So these are the answers we're looking for. All right, so here's one of those equations, or one of those statements that we have to change into an equation. So it says 5 less than what number squared is 20? So 5 less than, that means I have something and I'm subtracting 5. Okay, so what am I starting out with though? What number squared? So I have a number squared, which is n squared. N squared minus 5 is 20. Okay, so to solve this, I need to get rid of this minus 5. So I add 5 and I add 5. So when I do that, I have n squared, those cancel out, equals 25. The last step in this problem then is to take the square root of both sides. So the square root of n squared is simply going to be n. The square root of 25, again there are two answers. I have a positive 5 and a negative 5. All right, in this figure, we have the area of the larger square is 4 square units, which is twice the area of the smaller square. What is the length of each side of the smaller square? All right, in order to find that out, let's take a look at what we do know. We know the area of this larger square is 4 square units. So how do I find the area of a square? Well, I take the side times the side. So this times this is 4. So what would each side equal? Each side is going to equal 2. Now you might say, well, what about if I take the square root of 4, I can get negative 2 as an answer also. Yes, generally you can, but we will never have a distance that is a negative number. So the negative number would not apply in this case. Okay, so it says the area of the larger square is 4. That's twice the area of the smaller square. Okay, so that means the area of the smaller square is a 2 inside here, because the area of the larger square was 4. So to find the length of the side of the smaller square, I need to take the square root of this. So when I take the square root of 2, what does that equal? Guess what? It equals the square root of 2. I can't simplify that. I don't want to round it off in a decimal number. So my answer is going to be the square root of 2. And since this is length, I would put units, because I don't know what the units are. I would just write the word units. So the square root of 2 units. You might again say, well, it could be the negative square root of 2. It can't be in this case because length cannot be negative. So the length of the side of the smaller square would be the square root of 2 units. Okay, for this proportion, or for this example, we have a proportion and it says to solve. So we need to solve for the unknown, which is W. So the way that we're going to do this is we're going to do cross multiplication. So I have 4 times 9, that's going to give me 36. And I have W times W, which is going to give me W squared. So to solve for W, I need to take the square root of both sides. When I take the square root of W squared, I get W. The square root of 36, that could be a 6 or a negative 6. So W equals 6 or negative 6 and negative 6. And finally, 5 less than twice what number squared is 157? So let's take this statement and put it into an equation. So 5 less than, that means I had something and I subtracted 5. 5 less than what? Twice what negative number squared? So twice means 2 times. Okay, I have a number and I know when I go back it has to be a negative number squared is 157. Okay, so let's go ahead and solve this. Let's add 5. Let's add 5. So I get 2n squared equals, well, when I add those together, I get 162. Okay, to solve then for n squared, divide by 2, divide by 2. Those cancel. I get n squared equals, well, let's see, 2 goes into 16 how many times? 8. 2 goes into 2 one time. So I get n squared equals 81. Feel free to do the division. You don't have to try to do it in your head. You can do it on paper. So to solve for my n then, I need to take the square root of both sides. Square root of n squared is n. The square root of 81 is 9 or negative 9. 9 and negative 9. If I go back to the question though, it says what negative number squared? So I'm not going to include my positive answer this time because it asks specifically for the negative number. So n equals negative 9. All right, enjoy working on lesson 109.